Imagine discovering that your favorite European cities were built with the money of women erased by history. Florence, Paris, London. Their bridges, walls, and cathedrals were financed by taxes levied on female bodies condemned to eternal contempt. While the church preached purity, it profited from sin. While authorities spoke of morality, they regulated and taxed every intimate encounter. This is the story they never told you about the Middle Ages. The story of women who sustained entire empires, but were buried nameless in unconsecrated ground. You will discover how the greatest hypocrisy of medieval history works, and why this truth was hidden for centuries. This hypocrisy I just revealed was no accident of history. It was a calculated, cold, and extremely profitable system. I'll show you how it worked in practice. Take a map of medieval Europe and mark Florence, Venice, Paris, London, Bruges, and Barcelona. All these cities, now romantic tourist destinations, had something in common. They didn't just permit prostitution, they organized it as a state-owned enterprise. Florence, for example, officially established the Mala Scala neighborhood in 1415. It wasn't a hidden or marginalized area. It was a commercial zone recognized by the city council, with rules, taxes, and regular inspections. Paris created tolerated houses under the king's direct supervision. London transformed Southwark into Europe's largest center of regulated prostitution. But here's the detail that will leave you speechless. These women weren't just tolerated, they were essential to the functioning of the urban economy. The taxes they paid weren't symbolic. In some cities, they represented as much as 10% of total municipal revenue. And guess what? The Catholic Church, which preached chastity and condemned lust every Sunday, owned properties rented specifically for brothels. Entire monasteries lived off the income generated by this activity. The official argument was cynical but ingenious. It's better for men to sin with prostitutes than to corrupt virtuous maidens. St. Augustine even wrote that removing prostitution would be like removing sewage from a palace, soundly cleaner, but in practice uninhabitable. So we're not talking about a marginal activity the authorities turned a blind eye to. We're talking about the largest conscience-cleansing scheme in medieval history, where sin was transformed into currency, and currency into power. Now that you understand this was official business, you need to know how the state controlled every inch of these women's lives. Because it wasn't enough to profit from them, it was necessary to publicly humiliate them to maintain the hypocrisy. The system of control was so detailed that it made modern totalitarian regimes look like amateurs. Each city had its own code, but the goal was always the same: to ensure everyone knew exactly who these women were, where they were, and what they did. In Florence, prostitutes were required to wear a yellow veil. It wasn't a suggestion, it was the law. Going out on the street without the yellow veil meant a heavy fine, imprisonment, or expulsion from the city. In London, they were metal bracelets that couldn't be removed. In Paris, red belts were clearly visible. Some cities required bells to be hung on their clothing so they could be heard before they were even seen. But the control went far beyond clothing. They couldn't live just anywhere. Paris expelled them beyond the city walls. Other cities created specific ghettos, surrounded by walls with gates that closed during Sunday Mass. Some couldn't leave their homes before noon or after sunset. And the taxes? Prepare for them. They paid an annual registration fee to practice their profession, a tax on each client served, a nightly bed rental fee, a tax on wine served, a fine for each day of sickness, an additional fee if they became pregnant, and even a tax on the candles they used to light the room. In some cities, municipal inspectors visited the brothels weekly to check the records, count the clients, and calculate the taxes due. Imagine the scene: civil servants with notebooks and inkwells tallying up each intimate encounter as if it was sacks of wheat at the market. Most cruel of all, if any of these women tried to leave the profession, they remained marked for life. Once registered as a prostitute, they were always considered a prostitute. They couldn't legally marry, couldn't practice another profession, couldn't even testify in court. It was a perfect legal prison. They financed the state that imprisoned them. Now you know how the system controlled them from the outside. But what was it like to wake up every day, knowing that your very existence was a living contradiction? I'll take you inside a medieval brothel on any given morning, and you'll understand why this legal prison was even more brutal than it seems. Imagine waking up when the first light of day shines through glassless windows, covered only by thick cloths. The smell that greets you isn't breakfast. It's a dense mixture of sour sweat, spilled wine, smoke from burned candles, and bodies that worked all night. The candles are still flickering, almost extinguished, melting wax on wooden tables full of marks and scratches. You share a straw mattress with 2 or 3 other women. The straw is damp, stinking, full of bedbugs and fleas. There's no privacy. No corner is yours alone. Even your moans of pain are shared. First thing in the morning, the madam calls. An older woman who's been through what you're going through but now profits from your suffering. She counts the numbers. Who's sick? Who's managed to work? Who owes money? Who's going to be punished for some disobedience the night before? To wash, you have a bucket of cold water to fit everyone. A rough piece of cloth if you're lucky. Soap only on special occasions when a wealthy client arrives. Most days you scrub your body with ash mixed with animal fat, if you can even call that cleaning. Breakfast is a piece of stale bread dipped in weak beer. Sometimes a handful of sour cereal. The good food, the sweet wine, the fresh fruit, all of this is for the clients. You eat what's left when there's any. Then if you need to go out to buy something at the market or get medicine at the pharmacy, the most humiliating part comes. You put on your yellow veil, your identification bracelet, your red belt, whatever your city's mark, and walk the streets, knowing that every person who sees you knows exactly what you do. Mothers push their children away as you pass. Merchants charge you higher prices, but still accept your sin-stained coins. Men look at you with desire and disgust at the same time. Many of them were your customers the night before, but now they pretend not to know you. You return to the brothel carrying not only your purchases, but the weight of being a living pariah. A necessity that shames everyone, including yourself. And then, while you clean the rooms, change the dirty straw, mend the clothes torn by the previous night's violence, the city outside continues to function with the money that came from your body, the bridges you helped build, the walls your taxes funded, the churches where you will never be welcome. This was the cruel irony of each morning, waking up knowing you were simultaneously indispensable and despicable. If the morning was already brutal, the afternoon and evening transformed the brothel into a battlefield where your survival depended not only on pleasing clients, but on navigating a cruel and violent hierarchy. Around noon, when the sun was high and the city was bustling with activity, the real preparation for work began. And here you discovered that not all prostitutes were created equal. There was a social pyramid within hell itself. At the top were the veterans, women aged 25 to 30, who already knew all the tricks of survival. They had regular clients, wealthy merchants, even nobles, who paid well and were less violent. They got better rooms, less patched clothes, and slightly more decent food. In the middle were the common workers, women between 18 and 25 who served the average clientele, artisans, soldiers, and small-scale traders. They shared rooms, competed for clients, and lived in the hope of one day rising through the ranks. And at the base of the pyramid, be prepared for this, were the girls, some as young as 13 or 14, sold by their own families or kidnapped from the countryside. They were kept with the worst clients, the most violent, the drunkest. They slept on the floor, ate the scraps of the scraps, and rarely lived long enough to become veterans. Preparing for the night was a war ritual. Chalk powder mixed with ash to whiten the face, not for beauty but to hide the marks of disease and violence. Pork fat with herbs to color the lips and disguise the smell. Hair was combed with combs shared by all, spreading lice and scalp diseases. The clothes were a horror show. Torn silk dresses patched dozens of times, that once belonged to some noble lady and now served to seduce drunkards. Fake jewelry, cheap beaded necklaces, anything that gleamed in the dim candlelight. When night fell and the first candles were lit, the brothel transformed. The first customers arrived still sober, merchants seeking discretion, young apprentices spending their first coins, married men fleeing their family responsibilities. But as the night wore on, the clientele changed. Drunks arrived, violent ones, those who had lost money gambling and wanted to take their anger out on someone weaker. Groups of soldiers arrived who viewed women as war prizes. Those who enjoyed inflicting pain arrived. The madam watched from afar, not to protect the women, but to protect her profits. If a customer destroyed too much of her merchandise, she intervened. Not out of compassion, but out of economy. An injured prostitute couldn't work, and a prostitute who didn't work didn't generate money. The money, oh the money, never stayed in their hands. First, the madam took her share, usually 60% of the total. Then came the municipal taxes on each client. Then the room rent, the cost of food, clothing, candles and medicine when they fell ill. At the end of the night, after serving 5, 6, sometimes 10 different men, a medieval prostitute would have enough coins to buy bread for the next day. And look, some tried to hide a penny here and there, dreaming of saving enough to buy their freedom. But the bills piled up faster than their savings. An illness, a fight, an unwanted pregnancy, any unforeseen event plunged them deeper into debt. It was a perfect trap. They worked to pay for the right to continue working. This vicious cycle of work and debt couldn't last forever. And when their bodies finally gave up, these women discovered that the system that exploited them had also planned their disposal. At 30, a medieval prostitute was already considered old. Think about it. 30, an age when women today are in the prime of life, but which at the time meant the end of the line. The body simply couldn't resist. It wasn't just the years, it was the years multiplied by violence, disease, botched abortions, and constant malnutrition. Syphilis was a slow and painful death sentence. It began with small sores that women tried to hide with powder and makeup. Then came skin rashes, hair loss, and tooth decay. In its final stages, the disease attacked the brain, causing dementia and death. And there was no cure, absolutely none. Gonorrhea caused constant pelvic pain, bleeding, and infertility. Many developed widespread infections that left them with chronic fevers and extreme weakness. Imagine trying to seduce a client when you can barely stand. The abortions were even worse. Without medical knowledge, women used toxic herbs and unsterile instruments, methods that often caused fatal hemorrhaging. Those who survived were often left with permanent scars, chronic pain, and internal scars that made every sexual encounter torture. And when a woman could no longer attract clients, when wrinkles appeared, when illnesses became too visible to hide, when competition with younger girls became impossible, the madam simply threw her out without warning, without compensation, without a penny of everything she had earned over the years. You're no longer useful. Get out! These women found themselves on the streets, literally with nowhere to go, no family to take them back. After all, how could they explain years of absence without any professional skills other than the one no one else wanted? Many became beggars, extending trembling hands at the doors of churches which always rejected them. Others tried to survive by stealing, selling the few rags they still had. Some prostituted themselves on the streets for ever-decreasing prices, competing with rats for the attention of the most desperate drunks. Most died of hunger, cold, or disease within a few months. And when they died, they weren't even given a proper burial. The church refused to bury them in consecrated ground. They were thrown into mass graves outside the city walls, along with criminals and suicides, without a tombstone, without a name, without a single prayer, as if they had never existed. Some, very few, managed to escape this fate. Women who had managed to save enough to buy a small tavern, or who found a man willing to overlook their past. But even these lived in constant fear of being recognized and exposed. The truth is that the medieval system had created the perfect machine of human destruction, sucking every drop of youth, beauty, and health from these women, transforming it all into gold that financed empires, and then discarding them like trash when they were no longer useful. And most cruelly, the city they helped build continued to function normally, as if they had never existed. But here's what will make you angry. While these women died in anonymity, the legacy of their suffering remained alive and pulsating in every stone of the cities we know today. I'll give you real numbers that historians have uncovered in the municipal archives. In Paris, between 1500 and 1500, taxes levied on prostitution financed the construction of 12 bridges, the expansion of 3 kilometers of city walls, and the renovation of more than 50 public buildings. In Florence, fees paid by prostitutes represented 15% of the municipal budget, money that was used to pave streets, build aqueducts, and erect the palaces that are now world-famous museums. Have you ever visited the Tower of London? Part of its construction was financed by taxes from the Southwark district. Have you ever marveled at the medieval bridges of Bruges? The money came directly from the city's regulated brothels, those majestic Gothic cathedrals that appear on every postcard. Many received purification donations made with profits from prostitution, but it doesn't stop there. The history books you studied in school tell of great merchants, trade routes, and medieval fairs that generated fortunes. What they don't tell you is that a significant portion of this economy depended on the money circulating through brothels, merchants who sold fabrics, jewelry and perfumes to prostitutes, winemakers who found their best clients in brothels, and doctors who charged fortunes for ineffective treatments for venereal diseases. Medieval prostitution wasn't just a sector of the economy. It was a central cog that made the entire system work. And do you know what the most perverse part is? The same men who built their fortunes and reputations on this system were the ones who wrote the official history. They portrayed themselves as pillars of Christian morality, patrons of the arts, defenders of family and virtue. Meanwhile, they completely erased from the chronicles the women who made all this possible. In official records, they appear only as numbers, revenue from special taxes, income from regulated activities. They weren't even entitled to have names in historical documents. Worse still, they created a narrative in which they were the villains of their own history. In the sermons of the time, in moral texts, in literature, prostitutes were portrayed as diabolical temptresses who corrupted virtuous men, as if they had chosen that life, as if they had the power to seduce and destroy, when in fact, they were the system's greatest victims. This lie was so well constructed that it survived for centuries. Even today, when we think of medieval prostitution, many people imagine powerful and seductive, almost mystical women who manipulated wealthy men. The reality was exactly the opposite. Girls sold by desperate families, women trapped in cycles of debt and violence, bodies discarded when they were no longer useful. The result? Europe's most romantic cities were literally built on the corpses of anonymous women. Yet the romantic history we tell about them doesn't mention this, not even by chance. That beautiful bridge you photographed in Paris, that Renaissance palace that left you speechless in Florence, that Gothic cathedral that made you feel the divine presence, all of them bear in their foundations the invisible mark of women who paid with their lives, so you could admire them centuries later. And perhaps most ironically of all, today these places are symbols of romance, passionate encounters, honeymoons and honeymoons. Couples from all over the world visit these cities to celebrate love, unaware that they are walking over the bones of women who never had the right to love, respect, or even a dignified death. History erased their names, but it couldn't erase their legacy. It's there in every stone, in every arch, in every tower that still impresses us today. And now you're asking yourself, why do I need to know this? Why resurrect such a brutal and depressing story? The answer will surprise you, because this story never really ended. What you've just discovered isn't just a dark chapter from the medieval past. It's the instruction manual for how power works to this day. How can entire systems be built on the exploitation of vulnerable people? How can society simultaneously depend on and despise those who sustain it? How can history be written by the victors to hide their own contradictions? Think about it. How many times have you heard about essential but undervalued work? How many times have you seen people called heroes during the day and treated as invisible at night? How many times have you witnessed systems that profit enormously from human vulnerability, but place all the blame and responsibility on the victims themselves? The structure that destroyed these medieval women, economic exploitation, PL, social stigma, PL, and the victim-blaming narrative, didn't die in the Middle Ages. It simply changed its clothes. But there's another, even more important reason to know this story: respect for the truth. For centuries, these women were reduced to footnotes in history books. At best, they were transformed into stereotypes. They're legends and romantic fantasies that had nothing to do with the brutal reality they lived. They deserve to have their stories told, not as perfect victims or seductive villains, but as complex human beings who were ground down by a system that depended on their suffering. They deserve to be recognized that their lives had value, that their deaths were unjust, that their names, even if we never know it, matter. And perhaps most importantly, they deserve to be learned from their suffering, to be used as a mirror to better understand our own times, our own systems of exploitation, our own tendency to create convenient narratives that absolve us of uncomfortable responsibilities. Every time you pass through a historic European city, every time you admire a medieval bridge or a Gothic cathedral, remember, you are not just looking at ancient stones, you are looking at the physical testimony of lives sacrificed. at unintentional monuments to human suffering that we would rather forget. This does not mean you can no longer appreciate the beauty of these buildings. It means you can appreciate them consciously, with a full understanding of the price they paid. And maybe, just maybe, this awareness will make us better at recognizing and questioning the injustices of our own time. Because truth has this inconvenient quality. Once you know it, you can no longer pretend it doesn't exist. And once you understand how exploitation worked in the past, it becomes much harder to quietly accept it when it happens in the present. Medieval prostitutes can no longer be saved, but the lessons of their lives can help us save others in other contexts who are being ground down by similar systems right now. That's why stories like this need to be told, not to depress, but to liberate, not to blame the past, but to illuminate the present, not to create despair, but to generate awareness. And who knows, maybe this is the true revenge these women deserved, that their anonymous deaths will become knowledge that prevents other anonymous deaths. This story kept me thinking for days after I finished researching. And I bet you're also having a lot of thoughts running through your head right now. In fact, tell me in the comments what moment impacted you the most, what parallels you see with today. I read every comment and always learn something new from you. If this video made you see medieval history in a different light, you'll probably love the next one I've prepared. It's about something even more disturbing, how children were treated in the Middle Ages. Spoiler, it wasn't anything like the fairy tales we know. It's appearing on your screen, and I guarantee it will leave you speechless. You know what strikes me the most? Most people still don't know these stories, so if you thought it was important for more people to know about this, share it with someone who also enjoys real history, without romanticizing it. It could be that friend who always posts photos of European cities. They need to know about this. And look, if you've made it this far, it's because you genuinely care about real history. So subscribe to the channel and activate the bell, because every week I bring you stories that have been hidden, manipulated, or romanticized. Stories that completely change the way you see the world. Oh, and leave that like. It really helps me continue researching and bringing you this content that takes weeks to produce. Each like motivates me to delve even deeper into the historical archives. See you in the next video.